Awesome. So I think that's kicked everything off. And so, yeah, welcome and good morning, everyone, to our webinar today on the anatomy of M365 attacks with Darktrace. And if I can get my slides to go next, that would be awesome. So before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping rules here. So everyone's been put on to mute, of course, and there's quite a number of us today. There will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have questions throughout the sessions, please do put them into the chat window and we can go through those towards the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and that will be made available to you guys after the session. And following the session, there will be a feedback form sent around. So please do fill that in. Feedback is always appreciated. In terms of the agenda today, so I'm going to do a little bit of an intro in terms of who Bytes are. And then I will hand over to Mariana to go through the main content of today in terms of looking at how Microsoft 365 can be compromised with a number of attacks, and how do we look at those IOCs, with Darktrace. We're going to also look at things like how investigators can gain that visibility in real time across some of these attacks and the events that they generate, and look at how attackers impersonate trusted SaaS-based tools to build out their attacks. We'll then, again, have our allocated time for Q&A, so we can definitely answer any and all questions at that point. So going straight into the who are we on Bytes side, I'm hoping that a number of you guys are familiar with who Bytes are, but never hurts to give a little bit of an introduction. So I suppose the way that I generally tend to explain Bytes is Bytes did complete a merger at the start of this year with our sister company, which was Bytes Security Partnerships, and this really has brought a wealth of security expertise into the mix. We have a very high number of skilled security experts and security consultants that are, of course, on hand to support in a number of areas. And also, as part of this merger, we've also gained a fully built direct to third line service desk with an amazing track record in supporting and resolving issues for certain security certain security solutions. This, again, further proves our skills and success within the security arena. Now, of course, there are a lot of things that Bytes can do. There's also, quite a number of resources that we now have, as mentioned on the last slide. And, given the fact that we've got a substantial number of these resources, they align to different areas and different categories, which I've, of course, put up on screen. Now, I break it down into 6 areas, which generally consists of things like, our 24/7 support desk, which is our direct to third line engineer support desk, but we also have a professional services team for things like implementation of these solutions. We also have divisions like our security alliances and advisory teams for providing a number of different workshops on security and advice around the different solutions in the market. This is further coupled with the security alliances side to be able to leverage our partner status for a commercial advantage with a number of our vendors. And last but not least, our cyber consulting division, which I, of course, will cover on the next slide. So we know that solutions in security, they make up a big part of security. There's no doubt there. Whenever someone mentions security, we're always looking at a number of different solutions. But it's also important to understand that processes, controls, risk assessments, and more importantly, compliance to actually prove that we're doing security correctly and security is effective with those with solutions is key. And this is where we've really built out a cyber consulting division to provide that security strategy, that audit and advisory, and those business assurance type services. Our cyber consulting division has invested significantly in obtaining and maintaining our security accreditations internally, and also our auditory capabilities. But additional to this, we also can use our cyber consulting division to help and support our customers in a number of these key different areas. So I find this is, absolutely key. Again, as mentioned, solutions is one part of it, but being able to effectively implement and use security effectively and achieve that compliance status is again key. And this really complements what we do within Bytes. And as a separate note to this, would definitely, recommend an introduction to this division to understand more of its capabilities, to understand how we can play, that active role when it comes to your strategy and compliance. However, today we're of course not here to talk about the whole cyber consulting and Bytes division. We are of course, here to discuss the M365 piece with Darktrace. So today we are joined by Mariana, the Director of Email Security at Darktrace. I'm sure she'll give an introduction shortly. And this is to talk us through and investigate some of the stealthy attacks against M365 and understand the early indicators of compromise. For those of you that don't know Darktrace, and I'm sure, again, Mariana will give an intro, so apologies if I am stealing your thunder a little bit. But from the Bytes side, we have worked closely with Darktrace for a couple of years now, and our customers, and we've also introduced Darktrace to a number of our customers, given their presence in the market as a leader in cyber AI and being able to achieve a number of different security requirements. As a solution, they have proven time and time again to not only be able to detect several suspicious and malicious activities on the network, but also having the means to introduce autonomous response capabilities and being able to quickly contain cyber threats. Anyway, I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely keen to see some of these attacks in action. Definitely don't want to steal any more of Mariana's thunder. So over to you, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Donato, and thank you everyone who's joined today. Truly an honor to be speaking with you today about some of the attacks or some of the methodologies really around how email is such, from an attacker point of view, it's such a pervasive tool and we see it time and time again. Now, one of the things I do want to stress is, what I'm going to share with you today is one attack cycle. It is by no means the only type of attack that we see, but it's a story that exists in various permutations, and I'm sure that everyone actually will have either heard of somebody or have seen it directly, in your own environment, perhaps some variation of this in your personal lives, or somebody who's been affected, because email continues to be a very successful attack vector. Part of the reason why we see attackers using email so much is that it succeeds. More than 90% of all cyber attacks actually start with an email. And if you just think about that for a second, it's a staggering amount. It's 9 of every of the 10 news stories we read about in the newspaper, all those different compromises. And the reason is largely, attacking firewalls and attacking infrastructure. It's largely something that is left to Hollywood these days. I mean, we still see it, of course, but attackers have become quite smart in realizing that it's far easier to hack a human, to trick someone into clicking on a link or driving on curiosity or fear or any one of those emotions that are very much part of our human self. And because also of the shift to working remotely, all of the chaos, all of the confusion that 2020 has been very prevalent this year, what we've seen is that we're having a really hard time as human beings just to keep up with all the digital transformation projects. So what we have is a perfect storm, right? We have people working at home off the protection that generally is afforded by being physically in an office space or the digital protection that gives us. We are sharing and converging personal and work spaces, networks, Wi-Fi devices, more than ever before. And also we're introducing tools to keep us safe, tools that then the IT departments or your security teams might be rolling out. This might be VPN, it might be moving to the cloud. So many things that have changed that makes it likely that humans are more distracted or more likely to fall for an email-based attack. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, I want to share with you guys a little bit about what would an AI-powered attack look like and how I would essentially think about attacking some of you guys on the call. Don't worry, I won't. I promise it won't be me. So first of all, let's talk about what a compromised Microsoft 365 account hijack looks like. This is a story which has multiple elements of attack, and you might have seen one element of this play out. You might have already read about some of these types of attacks in articles. I believe actually there's a handout in today's webinar sharing some email threats. The story I'm about to tell you is a pretty familiar one. We had a partner, so you can think of a partner, a business partner, a supplier that gets attacked. Their email environment is somehow compromised. One of their users, maybe their credentials had been stolen. So this user is now sending out emails, perhaps requesting information, perhaps it's an invoice. But so there's an email sent from a trusted partner that is received. And this malicious email, which is sent from a legitimate account, actually has a malicious payload with a file storage link. So when we talk about file storage, we're talking about SharePoint, OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, Google shared spaces, you name it. Essentially, anything that we are nowadays dealing with, I'm just going to put this online so that someone can download it. Now, what I think was interesting is that this is a story where we only saw one account at the partner firm be compromised. So it was a very stealthy attack. But the stealth kind of flew out the window, I think, when then the malicious emails, the volume of emails that were launched from the secondary attack was quite high. So there was a primary infection of someone. That attack was then used to launch this bunch of emails. One of those emails gets a new victim. That new victim is in turn compromised, and that is now used to send 1,600 emails out in a 25-minute period. So let's see this in action. What does this look like when it plays out? And what does it look like when we're interpreting it through Darktrace's AI? So first of all, we see here on the left-hand side a collection of emails that had been received at this company. There is a pattern in this attack that we are seeing multiple users receive multiple RFP requests, requests for proposal for safer storage systems sent over to Stephen. John receives RFP for CMD logistics, and then the accounts department had received RFP for AJ Grant Group. Now, what I think is interesting here is that the differences in the subject lines indicates to me that some homework had been done. Either these are prospects that are real, or at least they are plausible. Somebody's taken time to send different requests to different people. And so this partner who had been compromised, basically the address book had been used to send it into these different people. What I think is interesting here is that we're seeing the scores in the anomalies differ from email to email. This is a representation of how strange does the AI think that this email is. And that's important because whenever we talk about email security, we tend to fall into this binary trapping of thinking that something is either good or bad, that it should either be allowed in or not. But actually, email security should match the far more nuanced reality that is interaction between human beings. So is it strange that I'm receiving an RFP from this person to this person? Well, not really, because this is a trusted partner. There is existing communication. But there are aspects of this communication that are really triggering the AI to say, actually, these three emails are highly unusual. They're scoring at an anomaly of 72, 96, and 83%. And there are different reasons for this. Those different reasons can be unusual time of day. They can be that these people don't usually correspond with attachments, or the sender might be weird. Whatever the weirdness is that is giving the AI a lot of confidence into saying that this is unusual, very, very unusual, is the fact that there is a link in all of these emails that is pointing to a storage system, a file storage system online. And for the user, if they were to click on that link, they would be taken to a page, as we see on the right-hand side. It looks identical to the login page for Microsoft 365. So the story or the email would plausibly go something like this. You receive a request for a proposal. Click here to fill it out, or click here to help me fill out the request for proposal. You go to a shared document that seems to be in SharePoint. You've been signed out of SharePoint for an activity, please log in again. Now, some of us might think twice before putting in our credentials again. Unfortunately, one user actually did input their credentials, and of course, this was not the real Microsoft's login page. By putting in the credentials, they've effectively handed over their credentials to the attackers, who now have control of his email. So what do we see here is stage 2. So stage 1 was the partner being compromised. Stage 2 is this company here, the target company, let's say. So what we have is now an attacker that has the legitimate credentials of Paul Peterson. And this, on the left-hand side, the 100% anomaly email is the email that Paul Peterson had received from that attacker, right? That RFP request for no lens transport. So Paul had clicked on it, handed over his credentials. And then what happened was that the attacker used those credentials to do something odd online. There was an odd activity in the SaaS environment, so in the Microsoft 365 environment. This was very odd for Paul. We see the AI interpreting at an odd level of 56%. That's the anomaly scoring. And we see that an anonymous link was created. And the time codes actually shows, it was on the very same day. So this attacker didn't waste much time. Following the creation of this rule, what happened is also on the next day. So we see here, this happened on Wednesday, August 12th, right? That was the initial email was received. A few hours later, the rule was created. On August 13th, the attacker then was satisfied that they had done enough reconnaissance on Paul's account. They had set up their links that they needed to. And the attackers used Paul's account to send out 1,685 emails to trusted contacts that would recognize Paul Peterson as the sender. This takes us back to the beginning of the story, because now this has all shifted. So all the recipients of these emails, they're now receiving an email from somebody, Paul, that they recognize, saying, actually, can you please click to this link and do something with it? And of course, then the attacker is just propagating that same methodology more and more, going from trusted contact to trusted contacted, harvesting a whole bunch of credentials until they get either to a C-level person who has very, very high visibility and high privileges, or maybe they hit jackpot of the company that they were trying to target to begin with. So this chain is very difficult to break, because the attackers are using trusted known senders. They're using valid infrastructure, which basically doesn't get picked up by the vast majority of email security products, because those security products are looking at rules. They're looking of, is the sender real? Is the sender trusted? And of course, it passes all of those checks. And we've seen this then play out also on Twitter, where a very similar situation happened, where somebody that was doing a proof of value, who was testing Antigena, actually was on the receiving end of one of these campaigns. So what we have here on the left is the tweet that we saw by Eleonora. She says, my work email account has been hacked and I'm dealing with the situation right now. Please do not respond to any emails you receive about an invoice. So Eleonora is now personally trying to get the word out to all of her contacts to say, if you've got an email from me, don't open it, it's a hack. Kaj over at SOCFIN UK, we're doing a trial with Antigena email, and within this same time frame, happened to receive one of Eleonora's emails with this fake invoice. And what we see on the right is Kaj, who very kindly shared the screenshot of the AI's interpretation, showing all the ways in which the AI had said, hang on a second, this is very unusual. There are loads of things that were triggered. We see here the link hidden to a file storage, the classification of the link. This is a new activity, despite the fact that it was a trusted contact. So what we have here is a whole new way to think about email security that goes beyond those rules. It looks at not whether or not an email is good or bad, but whether or not it belongs. And this is a huge shift in mentality, because as we were thinking, right, 94% of attacks are still starting in the inbox. There's something fundamentally broken here of the way that we're dealing with security if we keep thinking of an email bad versus good, of a trusted contact being bad versus good, allowed or not allowed. And these rules, these restrictions are what have basically dominated the security market as a whole, right? We've seen this with permissions, we see this with email. And so it's time to apply that same AI to think beyond the obvious email itself and contextualize the human and understand, right, given what I know about this person, does it make sense for me to be seeing this email? Is this email present a threat? Now, I showed you guys a lot of anomaly scores scoring very highly, and sometimes we then think, okay, well, an anomaly isn't necessarily an attack, right? It is true that every attack starts with some anomalous activity, but it's important that an AI is also able to discern when something that is strange is okay. It's strange because it's new, but the whole world is new. The whole world turned upside down overnight, and so newness doesn't necessarily need to be blocked. And I think that my next example illustrates that quite nicely. We had a marketing team that was looking for a new corporate gift, and they decided to go on patch.com. This is a website that retails or e-tails houseplants. So a nice corporate gift, a lot of people spending time indoors, bring in a plant, and this user then signed up to the patch newsletter to stay informed, receive offers, and all those things. So they received the newsletter shortly thereafter. Welcome to Patch, Urban Jungles Delivered. This is the very first newsletter that our user, Roberta, had received. What I think is interesting is on the right-hand side here, we see the connection rarity, the Darktrace rarity score. This is essentially how odd, how unusual is this email. Because the email that was received from Patch was 99% odd. It was a 99% anomaly, and that was simply because nobody at this company had ever received an email from Patch before. And so what is hugely important, though, is that the AI was able to contextualize the fact that there had been activity. Roberta had gone to the Patch website. There had been an exchange of data. There had been an exchange of information, minor, just by visiting the website. So the domain had 1% of interaction with it. And so it's not about stopping things that are unusual. It's about responding to that which seems unusual. And so if there were a link, we could think of how do we neutralize the link? If it were an attachment, how do we make the attachment safe? Those are the kinds of responses that are dependent on the circumstances and on the capability of the AI being able to understand what about an email is unusual and responding to it accordingly. When we're talking, though, about Microsoft 365, we have so much information because it's not just about the email being unusual. If I just go back to my previous slide, it's also about the activity. Because Microsoft 365 isn't just about the email activity, it's also about logging in, it's about using files, it's about sharing and creating rules and looking at information. And so when you have somebody's account credentials, you are in a very privileged position to be able to go in and do a whole bunch of reconnaissance, which of course we've seen here is the way that we then do the secondary attack. But let's think for a second, how do we do the first attack? How would I attack you? When we're talking about reconnaissance, yes, you could do some reconnaissance with the credentials of somebody you've already compromised. But before we get to that point, we're going to need to find an initial person to compromise, or a person to impersonate, or a SaaS vendor to impersonate. So what does this look like? Well, when we're talking about impersonation attacks, it's either that trusted partner that is their infrastructure is being used, right? Like Peter's identity has been co-opted in this attack. Or maybe it's, hey, you've now received a new VPN software update, click here to download the newest. So you can impersonate a human, you can impersonate a SaaS provider, you can impersonate many things on the internet. And so I can also decide, well, I can pretend to be you, or I can pretend to be someone you know. I should probably put in a legal disclaimer. Everything that I'm about to say from this point forward is academic. It is by no means an endorsement of attack techniques or methodologies. Also, I am not an ethical hacker, and I should say this. This is not a how to attack or how to impersonate. But I've spent a bit of time in this field, and if I were to think about how I would impersonate someone, there's these two ideas, right? I can either pretend to be you, or I can pretend to be someone you know. In a way, actually, also social media has given us a gift. There are so many places in which you can reasonably expect to find a digital footprint of either a company or a worker. So many different places where you can infer interests, fears, curiosities, and so on. So let's take me, for example. I've done this where I've sometimes looked at the social media profiles of people involved in events such as today, but we've decided that might be a little bit too creepy. But each and every one of you now have, been exposed to Gennaro, to Michael, who's organized and sent a lot of the communications, and you're now aware of me and my name, Mariana. Mariana Pereira happens to be one of the most common combinations of name, last name in the Portuguese language. And so if you actually try to search for me on LinkedIn, you'll get, almost 5,000 results of Mariana Pereiras. And you'll then get variations. We see here, Mariana Capucho Pereira or Mariana Pereira, who also works digital marketing director. Very similar. We also have a shared connection. These are Marianas who are connected to me somehow, 2nd degree, 3rd degree persons. Now, how would you, and I'm saying you, every one of you guys who are on this webinar today, how would you know that an email that you're receiving from a Mariana Pereira is legitimately from me, the speaker, versus somebody trying to pretend to be me? Well, you know that I'm writing, that I work at Darktrace, but maybe I also have other domains. Perhaps I also am affiliated with other companies. Of course, the school I went to, companies I've worked for in the past, you might want to try something like that. So if you were to try and impersonate me, and again, this is not an invitation, please, for anyone to try this, the next thing that you'd need is some infrastructure, some online infrastructure. Probably look to buy a domain. And domain purchasing is very, very easy these days. You can go to a number of providers, GoDaddy to 123Reg and so on. And you'll buy a domain name that maybe is creatively similar to the one that you are trying to attack. Darktrace.com, of course, is taken, as are many others. But what about .life, .co.uk, .info, .design? How about domain names that are similar to your names and the organizations that you represent? This is essentially how attackers think about setting up the infrastructure for an attack, for highly targeted attack. When an attacker does this en masse and it's unsophisticated, they are using automation tools to purchase domains in bulk. These are throwaway domain names that they simply use to set up infrastructure that then allows certain verifications to happen, SPF, DKIM, for instance. These are easy to bypass, and with a name that sounds similar to a trusted contact, to a board member, to a C-level executive, or of a known partner. These are now very, very tried and tested methodologies with which attackers are using different degrees of sophistication to do a very well-crafted initial email that encourages you to click on a link, that encourages you to hand over your account credentials by tricking you and making you think that you're logging into Microsoft, and then Bob's your uncle, they're in. The next evolution of this, I hope I haven't scared you off, and of course there's light at the end of the tunnel, but the next evolution of this is to do everything that I've just described at even greater speed and even greater scale. Now, automation has paved the way for this domain purchasing to be done in very, very large volumes and then thrown away. But what happens when we then put that speed of automation and that scale of automation together with AI? AI has been used as a force for good by Darktrace. We are extraordinarily proud about the fact that we are capable of applying AI to discern those subtlest deviations from normality, whether that is in the network, in the cloud, in your email. Of course, AI is also being used by attackers to arm up. This summer, there were a series of articles about GPT-3. GPT-3 is a phenomenal bit of research that was done by OpenAI, and The Guardian and other publications reported on the very creative and very, very competent use of language that this AI has demonstrated. Not only has it been able to generate articles and good thought leadership pieces, we also saw it express humor. We saw some creative poetry and a Twitter battle. I believe it also did some musical composition. AI is getting better and better at mimicking human experiences. And another one of these examples dates back to 2018, where we saw an AI system be taught the essence of the great masters of painting. And we taught a second AI system to detect, learn how to spot a fake painting from a real painting. And essentially, these two AIs went and did battle for 2 weeks. One AI would paint, the other AI would try to figure out if it's a real painting or a fake. And after 2 weeks of these two AI systems doing battle, this painting emerged. I personally think that it belongs right alongside the great masters in any museum wall. I'd be happy with it in my living room wall, but I'll leave the details of the artistic critique to the experts. The point is that AI is very quickly becoming a reality, and the barrier to entry is lowering, both on the defense side as well as on the attacker side. And what we've seen with Microsoft 365 were a series of compromised attacks and a series of human hacks that then allow the victims to live in a false sense of security while the attackers are using those legitimate credentials to learn, to figure out what their next step is, and to really scale up the investments that they've made. We have time for one more example of this. The story is pretty similar. It's an electricity company that was compromised. Their SaaS environment had been compromised, probably with an existing correspondence of targeted fish. So folks, we're seeing a very similar story at a different point in the world and a different point of time. But this is the story that keeps repeating itself in various permutations because it is successful. What we saw here was then and I'm sharing with you is another view of a similar kind of attack. The login credentials had been stolen, and we saw this unusual cloud activity, the unusual activity of going into the Microsoft environment and reading and accessing fast downloads, uploads of a whole bunch of privileged information. I mean, we're talking contracts, we're talking marketing plans for the next year, research and development, and brainstorming ideas. They also looked at who are the clients that are outstanding in their payments. And let's only send an email to those clients and ask them, remind them to make payment. A series of emails were then sent out asking the clients to make the payment, and the payment information had been altered. Rather than the company's legitimate bank address, they had now inserted their own criminal bank address. And so the clients were making payments directly into the criminals' bank accounts. What we then had seen was the attacker covering their track. We see it here in the slog, the drafts, a creation, hard deletion, the creation, hard deletion of a series of emails that were then drafted and not sent. And then, of course, the ones that were sent were deleted out of the sent box. And this is why we miss it. It's not incompetence. It is not that we are lazy. It is not that we as humans just can't keep up. We can keep up, but we're also tired and we're overwhelmed. And so the AI needs to help us, needs to be able to step in and spot it when the human or the user appears to be behaving in a very weird way. And this is the kind of thing that the AI is really, really good at doing, because it does it at mass. It does it 24 hours a day. It does it in a way that then helps us, the human defenders, know where we need to be paying attention and know who it is we need to be helping out. I'm aware we're running out of time. Just one last thing to show here before I pass it back to Gennaro. What does it look like? I showed you guys so many screenshots of the AI. What does it look like in practice? Well, it looks indistinguishable from real emails. For anyone who's receiving an email that was sent from a compromised account, how can you tell? Short answer is you can't. You can't, because there's nothing here for us to hold on to. This is an email correspondence between Simon and David as they were getting ready for an event. You know what I'm going to say, right? Simon's account had been hacked. This wasn't the real Simon sending an email to David. This wasn't Simon sending the Bitly link saying, have you already seen this? I'm a very curious person. If I'm receiving and have you already seen this with a link from someone I know, odds are, if I have time, I'll click on it. There was a piece of research that came out that even when we know a link is malicious, 45% of the users will still click on it. That's that big red button with written, do not press on it. And the inner child in us all wants to go and do nothing other than press that button because we're curious. That's what's happening here. It's not just fake invoices. It's not just trusted partners or requests for proposals. It's also content that relates to COVID. It's content that relates to small business loans. It's things that are timely, election news, Brexit. It keeps changing, and the attackers keep changing their ways to keep up with things that are current because they can do it and because it's cheap to do so. So what we need here is context. It's context and contextualization of the AI that says, you know what? I actually am fully aware of the fact that there is an interaction between Simon and David. This is a very strange interaction, though, given what I know. There is behavioral anomaly. We'll look at the left-hand side of the screen. These are known correspondence, but actually this link, this email was sent to more people at David's company. And more people received this link, which actually looks more like a phishing link. It was an unusual time of day for Simon to be emailing. All of this, the AI concludes, actually looks very much like an account hijack. And so in a very simple way, we have digested and we show to the human defenders, to people like yourselves who are tasked with having to keep all of those Microsoft 365 accounts safe, how you can use AI in a very practical manner without needing to have yourselves a degree of mathematics from any university or machine learning, but you can actually use this because it very quickly understands and it transmits to you in an intuitive way of storytelling what has happened and then what it's done. So the AI here, having done this very rapid analysis, decides actually that link, we should probably not let them click on it. So let's lock that link. And having revised the understanding in near real time, right? This is super fast computations that it does. The AI has actually established that this is likely to be an account hijack. So even though the email is presented with 57% anomaly, so far less than some of the other examples we were looking at, because it is able to look beyond whether or not it's a trusted sender, whether or not the link is part of a phishing campaign, it can put all of these things together and revise its understanding of the threat and actually change its mind on the response that is more appropriate. And in this case, go as far as holding back this email altogether. The degree with which the AI can then respond to subtlety, this capability to be able to respond autonomously without it having been told specifically what to do, but to take the most appropriate action for the threat, having understood how it fits into the big picture, is a game changer. And it is why we're also right alongside some of the leading companies that I think no use case is more relevant in terms of split-second decisions than with F1. And we are absolutely proud and very, very encouraged by our partnership with F1 when we are also seeing phrases like this one from the CIO of McLaren. You know, they are relying on Darktrace's AI to fight back against those email attacks with a complete autonomy and lightning speed before damage is done. Microsoft environments present us with so many different ways in which we can detect an attack, not only from the unusual email itself, the unusual activity coming into the environments, the unusual creation of rules, the unusual large volume of outbound email. AI can stop any one of those stages, and I'd say that any one of those are fair game for you to stop it before it continues. And I hope that you have been inspired by this more than you've been scared by this talk to give AI a chance. And you are all welcome to try this in your own environments with the free 30-day proof of value. With that, Gennaro, I think we have some time for questions now.
Yeah, sure. I think I've got a couple of questions coming in now. So what I'll quickly do is just pull up the Q&A slide real quick. So guys, if there are any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to of course, put them into the panel. If you don't want your questions read out to the whole audience, then feel free to email us at tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. But Mariana, I'll read out a couple of questions that we have. So first one on the list is, would this approach work for any other applications of SaaS providers, not just Microsoft?
Thank you for that. Most certainly. In the end, it will apply. The same AI approach is all about using the insights that we have about the users, no matter what SaaS application they're using, whether also it's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. No, it doesn't really matter. I think gone are the days in which we had a perimeter or a finite definition of where the company ended. With so many different cloud providers and software providers, it's truly agnostic to where your business is or where your workers are working from. And so this kind of approach is absolutely capable of keeping up with any one of those, with those SaaS environments.
Awesome, thanks for that. Second question we have is, what are the performance implications for mail delivery?
That's a really good question. We get that a lot because email is so critical, right, to the running of the business that the last thing we want is to have any kind of impact or any kind of slowdown. It really is the connective fabric for so many companies. So there are different technologies and different deployment methods out there for cloud security or email security. With Darktrace, our approach has always been one to be passive and not to be in line of the critical activity. So we will take a copy of all the emails via journaling and then respond via an API call. And what that means is that there is zero impact in your environment. There is zero impact on the speed with which emails are delivered or going through your email environment at all. So there is zero performance implication whatsoever, and that's whether or not you're on-premise or in the cloud. We're parallel to the technical workflow, not in line. Of course, actually, Janara, if I can, that also means that, you know, in the case of a catastrophic failure, as we have seen happen with gateway providers, that should that service go down, in the unlikely event that that service goes down, there are also no downstream effects. You'll still receive your emails, even if there should be a catastrophic failure on the part of your provider. So I think that that's also an elegant solution that de-risks the business.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is what are the privacy concerns regarding employee email monitoring?
Yeah, so this depends greatly in what industry sector you work in and what country you're in. So different countries will have different requirements, but by and large, I think it's generally accepted that any one of us on this webcast today, any one of us who are charged with security, have the legitimate and you know, not only the legitimate reason from a business point of view, but actually we have the responsibility of making sure that our workers and our colleagues are working in a secure environment. So what you might have seen in some of the screenshots is that we don't actually see the emails themselves. The AI will always surface us the understanding of the metadata, so the conclusions, but also we will only be looking at sharing or exposing those metrics and parameters that are already public facing, right? So anything that is on the content, not the content of the email itself, but rather the envelope of the email. There's a huge amount that we can glean from that. So it does not invade anyone's privacy. We are very conscientious and very aware of all of those privacy rules. In the network side, Darktrace has been international since day one. And of course, you're always in control. So there are configuration options to decide sort of what kind of responses or actions you can take, or your users underneath your teams. For instance, if you have a tiered security team, different layers can have different access points. But yeah, great question. And one of the things that I think is hugely important is, as we're thinking of patient record, law firms and banks, these are some of the most expensive data breaches and some of the most valuable data assets, and they absolutely work with us for these kinds of protection tools.
Perfect, thanks for that, Mariana. There is another question that's come through, which is, could you share some false positives and true negative ratios of anti-GINA?
All right. That's a tricky one. So I personally don't love the language of false positives and false negatives because I think that it traps us back into that binary logic of something either being true or false or good or bad. And so when we're looking at the question is, should Antigena have responded? Did Antigena respond in the most correct way? Then that's a bit of a judgment call, isn't it? And that's where I think the AI is, it really comes into its own as the extra hands in the team. So the learning period is where anyone who's doing a proof of value will see it in action. The learning period brings down the overall activity level from one week to the next as the AI learns what is normal for the users. That's also why for the first week, we don't give prospects or customers access to the AI because it's still learning. So generally speaking, after a week, it has learned also that humans take off for 2 days every 5 and that there is a drop in activity level, meet the weekend. And then after that, week on week, it just gets better and better. So rather than thinking in terms of false positive or false negative, what I like to think is, how do we work with the AI for that initial month to supervise us, look over that it's making the decisions appropriately and that are consistent with what I would decide to do. And for that is why when we do the proof of value, when we do a deployment, we show what it would have done. And that helps you build confidence in the AI's decision-making capability, as it shows you, well, this is how it would have responded to this kind of threat, and this is why. Sorry, I definitely did not answer that one in the most in the way the question was formed, but I hope that satisfies the essence of what was behind the question.
I think I definitely covered off the main points there, Mariana, and I think we've probably got time for one more question. So, can this AI approach be used to look at outbound emails?
Yes, we do actually look at outbound emails. So when you set up the journaling rule, Darktrace is looking at all of the email flow that is hitting your email server. So it's both inbound and outbound, and the more data that you can give an AI, the better. So also, if you're looking beyond emails to contextualize, right, the Microsoft access logs or the cloud environments as a whole. The thing that I think is important, and I want in terms of setting expectations, is we're not able to action the outbound email, but incredibly, we're able to understand when outbound is unusual. So that screenshot that I was showing you guys with the 1,600 and something emails sent out, that is detection on the outbound. That is alerting on the outbound, and that is, you know, the soonest moment that you can possibly do something is then finally to even get visibility and understand that that is happening in your environment on the outbound. So it's that same AI that understands what is unusual for the inbound that is also looking at, would I normally expect Mariana or Gennaro to be sending this volume of things, or to these people, or with these kinds of subject lines. So it's really, really powerful.
Perfect. No, thank you very much for that. And I think that's all the questions we have for today. So I suppose, you know, to the audience, if you do have any further questions, if any questions do pop into your head following this session, then please do feel free to, you know, to reach out to us at tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, or you can also reach out to your Bytes account manager. But I think with that in mind, we can start closing down this session for today. I think the main points that I would like to cover on the close, of course, is please do stick around. There is a feedback form after this session that we would, you know, love for you guys to fill out and tell us how we did today. I also wanted to touch on the POV that Mariana took us through. You know, I think this is a very good and powerful and valuable next step, almost, just to see, you know, what that email flow, of course, looks like, and to assess, you know, are there any email threats within the environment, but also to see this solution and this concept in action. And I suppose, to quote Mariana here, you know, to give AI a chance, you know, in the security world. And with that, I would also say that, you know, the webinar recording will be made available after this session. But I think that is us done for today. So thank you so much for joining. We hope that you guys found this this session valuable. Again, please do fill out those feedback forms, and we can of course give you 10 minutes back to your day.